I came home one night to a quiet house that felt wrong. The lights were on, the TV buzzing with static, and the dinner I'd cooked before work still cold on the table. But it wasn't the silence that hit me first. It was the note taped to the fridge. 3 lines, written in her hurried handwriting. I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me. The kids are yours now. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a note that detonated my life in one breath. My wife, the woman I'd built 17 years of marriage with, had vanished, leaving me alone with 3 kids under 10. My name is Michael Harris. I was 39 when that night split my life into 2 parts, before and after. Before, I was a husband who worked construction during the day, grilled burgers on weekends, and thought the hardest thing in life was paying bills on time. After, I became a single father of 3 overnight, with no plan, no backup, and no idea how to explain to my children why mom was gone. I stood in that kitchen for a long time, staring at the note. My daughter Emily, 7 years old, was upstairs drawing. My twins, Daniel and Jacob, were fast asleep. I folded the paper carefully, placed it in a drawer, and locked it away. Because that's who I am. I don't explode. I don't beg. I plan. The first strike wasn't hers leaving. It was me realizing what she thought I would do. Crumble. Collapse under the weight of 3 kids and a mortgage. But that's not how I operate. I sat at the table that night, made a list in my notebook. Step 1, secure finances. Step 2, find childcare coverage for shifts. Step 3, stability at all costs. There was no space for tears, no time for anger. My kids would not see me break. Instead of calling her, instead of chasing her shadow, I started moving in silence. I went to the bank the next morning, checked our accounts. Half empty. She'd taken most of what we had. I froze what was left, redirected my paycheck into a separate account, and stored every receipt. Documents matter more than words. I met with a lawyer during my lunch break, explained the situation with no drama. She gave me a list of forms. I filed every one. Quietly. Methodically. The pressure started almost immediately. My mother-in-law called 2 days later, voice sharp, demanding to know what I'd done to drive her daughter away. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just listened, said nothing, and hung up. That silence unsettled her more than any shouting could have. My wife's family expected chaos. They got calm. Inside the house, though, the weight pressed harder every day. Emily asked why mom wasn't back yet. The twins woke crying at night. I answered in the simplest way I could. Mom needed time. But I'm here. Always. I kept my voice steady, even when my chest felt hollow. Kids can smell fear. Mine would never smell it on me. That first week, I installed cameras around the house. Not because I expected her return, but because I needed control. I needed proof, protection, eyes everywhere. When you've been blindsided once, you don't leave openings again. 18 years passed in silence after that night. I raised those kids. I built a life. I buried the note so deep it became just another scar. Until one morning, without warning, she was back. Standing on my porch with a suitcase, smiling like the last 18 years had been a vacation. Demanding to be mom again. And that's when my son, my quiet, steady Daniel, looked her in the eyes and said words that sent her into panic. Words she could never take back. Her return was like a storm breaking without warning. I opened the door that morning, and there she was. Laura. The same woman who had left me standing in the kitchen with a note and 3 children. She was older now, a little heavier around the eyes, but she smiled like nothing had happened. She wheeled her suitcase across the porch as if she were coming home from a long trip. Her first words weren't an apology. They weren't even an explanation. She said, "Where are my kids?" 18 years had passed since the night she disappeared. My children weren't children anymore. Emily was 25, a nurse working double shifts at the hospital. Jacob was in the Navy, deployed more often than not. And Daniel, the quiet one, still lived nearby, steady and loyal as the day he was born. He was the one who opened the door that morning, not me. And he was the one she called my son, as if the word had been waiting on her lips for years. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the door. I just stood in the living room doorway, arms crossed, watching her scan the house she had abandoned. She looked at the framed photos on the wall, birthdays, graduations, holidays, and smiled, like she belonged in them. She asked if she could sit. Daniel motioned to the couch, but he didn't sit beside her. He stood, arms folded, watching her. His silence was mine. Cold. Calculated. Her story spilled out fast. She claimed she'd made mistakes. She said she'd been scared, overwhelmed, too young to be a mother. She said she'd built a life somewhere else, but always thought about us. She wanted to come back now, she said. To be mom again. Her voice shook on that word, like she thought it would unlock forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't free. 18 years had carved a canyon between us. I didn't need to raise my voice. My silence was answer enough. And Daniel, who had grown up with that same silence, finally broke it for both of us. He looked her straight in the eye and said, "You're not mom. You're just a woman who left." The words froze her. She stammered, tried to reach for him, but he stepped back. No shouting, no scene, just distance. She looked at me then, as if I'd put those words in his mouth. But I hadn't. I didn't need to. He'd lived those years without her. He'd earned the right to say them. I walked to the cabinet in the corner, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folded note she'd left 18 years earlier. I placed it on the coffee table in front of her. She didn't touch it. She just stared, her face draining of color. That note was her signature, her confession. Nothing she said now could erase it. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She tried again, softer this time, almost begging. She said she wanted to make things right, to be part of the family. But the family had already been rebuilt without her. Brick by brick, year by year. I stood in the same calm silence I had learned the night she left. Because silence can be sharper than any words. Laura stayed on the couch as if she had every right to be there. Her suitcase by the door, her hands trembling just enough to betray the calm she tried to project. She spoke about wanting to reconnect, about second chances, about how family could heal if given time. But those words floated useless in the air. She had forfeited the right to call us family the night she chose freedom over responsibility. I didn't tell her to leave. Not yet. My strength has never been in raised voices. It's in patience, in letting silence do the work. So I stood there, arms folded, letting the weight of 18 years press against her. Daniel stayed close, his jaw tight, his body a wall between her and me. He had grown into the kind of man I always hoped he'd become. Steady, watchful, unshaken. She tried to direct her words toward him, not me. She told him she was proud of the man he had become, that she'd always imagined him strong, dependable. But Daniel's eyes stayed flat, cold. He didn't answer. That silence unsettled her more than if he had screamed. Silence is an indictment. She shifted her gaze back to me. She asked if she could stay a while, just until she found her footing. As if the house she abandoned was a safe harbor she could drift back into whenever her own seas turned rough. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply picked up her note from the coffee table, the same one she had written nearly 2 decades ago, and slid it back into the drawer. That piece of paper was my shield. It reminded me that I didn't need to justify my silence. She had written her decision in ink. Later that night, Emily came home from her shift, exhausted, hair tied back, scrubs still smelling of antiseptic. She froze in the doorway when she saw her mother sitting on the couch. Laura stood quickly, arms outstretched, calling her name like she expected a tearful embrace. Emily didn't move. She dropped her bag on the floor, crossed her arms just like Daniel and I had, and said nothing. Her silence was heavier than mine. Laura's voice cracked then. She said, "Don't I get a chance to explain?" But explanations were currency that no longer held value. My children had learned the same lesson I had. Betrayal speaks louder than excuses. Emily turned and walked upstairs without another word. The pressure was building now, not for me, but for her. Every silence from us was a mirror held up to her choices. She had expected anger, shouting, maybe even forgiveness. Instead, she found walls of quiet. And those walls don't crumble. That night, when the house finally settled, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where the note had once been taped. She was back under my roof, but I knew something she didn't. I hadn't prepared for her return specifically, but I had lived my life as if she might try. Every document stored, every account secured, every piece of proof guarded. If she thought she could reclaim a title she'd abandoned, she was about to learn what silence can really do. The next morning, I woke before dawn, as I always did. 18 years of single fatherhood had taught me discipline. Bills, lunches, shifts, house repairs, none of it waited for weakness. When I stepped into the kitchen, Laura was already there, sipping coffee like she owned the morning. She smiled faintly, asked if I still drank it black. I didn't answer. She looked smaller in the early light, a shadow of the woman I once knew, but her eyes still searched for a foothold. Daniel came down moments later, ready for work. He gave me a nod, then looked at her without a word. She tried to start small talk, asking about his job, his apartment, his life. He didn't respond. He just grabbed his thermos and walked out. The slam of the door wasn't anger. It was dismissal. Laura's voice cracked as she said, "They hate me." I didn't correct her. Hate wasn't the right word. Indifference was worse. My children had built a life without her, and now she was the outsider, a stranger intruding into something whole. By noon, Emily came downstairs. She'd barely slept, and her exhaustion made her patience thin. Laura tried again, telling her she was sorry, that she'd made mistakes, that she wanted to be in her life now. Emily didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply said, "You don't get to walk back into motherhood after almost 2 decades." Then she left for her next shift, leaving Laura shaking in the silence. I stayed calm, methodical. That evening, after she retreated to the guest room, I pulled out the old box I'd kept locked for years. Inside were school projects, family photos, and every document I had stored since the day she left. Birth certificates, bank records, the note she wrote. Proof of my role. Proof of her absence. I didn't show them to her. Not yet. But I laid them on the table in neat piles. A reminder to myself, preparation is power. Late at night, I checked the cameras around the house. She hadn't noticed them yet. I'd installed them long ago, not for her, but for life itself. Still, they were useful now. I watched her pacing the guest room, restless, opening drawers she had no claim to, touching things that didn't belong to her anymore. It wasn't anger that rose in me. It was clarity. She was already searching for a way back in, maybe even for leverage. The following day, she asked about Jacob. She said she wanted to see him, to hear his voice. I told her nothing. Jacob was on deployment, and I wouldn't let her drag him into this storm. She pressed, voice softening, trying to sound maternal. I stayed silent. Silence is strategy. She grew frustrated, saying, "I'm still their mother." But the words rang hollow in a house where she had been absent longer than she'd ever been present. The walls were closing in on her now, not me. Every second she stayed, the weight of the years pressed harder. She had expected tears, maybe even forgiveness. Instead, she found a family armored in silence, fortified by time, unmoved by her return. And she still didn't realize. This was only the beginning. On the third day, Laura's composure began to fracture. At first, she lingered in the kitchen, trying to insert herself into routines that no longer included her. She cooked breakfast unasked, setting plates on the table like she had authority. Daniel didn't touch his food. Emily left hers untouched as well. I sat across from her, eating quietly, unbothered. Silence was the sharpest rejection. It made her efforts look theatrical, like a stranger auditioning for a role no longer available. Later that morning, she followed me outside while I worked on the fence. She started speaking quickly, words tumbling out about the years she'd been gone. She claimed she'd left to find herself, that she'd been too young, too pressured, too suffocated by responsibility. She said she had thought of us every day, that she had carried guilt like a weight. Her voice cracked, as if tears might soften the truth. But guilt doesn't erase absence, and tears don't undo years. I kept hammering nails, steady and silent. She kept talking, trying to fill the space my silence created. Eventually, she demanded, "Say something." But I didn't. Because silence is strategy. Silence makes the other person reveal more than they intend. And she did. She admitted she'd remarried once, then divorced. She admitted there were other children, grown now, who no longer spoke to her. She admitted she had lost almost everything and had nowhere left to go. That was the real reason she had returned. Not love, not family, desperation. By evening, she grew bolder. She told Emily she wanted to meet her friends, her colleagues. Emily didn't answer. She told Daniel she wanted him to introduce her to his coworkers. He walked out the door without a word. Every attempt to pull closer only exposed the gulf between her words and reality. That night, she confronted me in the living room. Her voice shook with anger as she said, "You turned them against me." I met her eyes, calm and steady. The truth didn't need words. 18 years had turned them, not me. She paced the room, raising her voice, but the house swallowed her anger. Silence stood taller than rage. After she stormed upstairs, I pulled the box of documents back onto the table. Inside were records that told the real story. Her absence from birthdays, her silence during holidays, her absence in court filings, bank records, school papers signed only by me. Proof, not just of her leaving, but of my staying. The next morning, I noticed her rifling through drawers, opening cabinets, searching for something she couldn't name. Maybe it was control. Maybe it was proof that she still belonged. But in this house, everything was already accounted for. She could search all she wanted. She would find nothing. Because while she had been gone 18 years, I had been building not just a family, but a fortress. By the end of the week, Laura's calm veneer was gone. She moved through the house like a restless ghost, pacing rooms she no longer knew, opening closets that didn't belong to her. She lingered in Emily's doorway, watching her sleep after a night shift. She sat on the couch, staring at family photos that didn't include her. She was no longer trying to act like a mother. She was trying to convince herself she still had the right to be one. On Friday morning, she attempted her boldest move yet. She walked into the kitchen where Emily and Daniel sat and announced that she would be hosting a family dinner that night. She said it with authority, as if the years hadn't happened, as if the title of mom still carried weight in this house. Emily gave a thin smile, then stood and walked out without a word. Daniel didn't even look up from his coffee. Silence crushed her performance before it began. When evening came, there was no dinner, no gathering, only her pacing in the kitchen alone. I watched from the doorway as she opened the fridge, slammed it shut, then sank into a chair. Her hands trembled. She had finally started to understand. She was no longer a part of this structure. She was an intruder inside her own memory. That night, she tried a different tactic. She cornered me in the living room, her tone soft, almost pleading. She said she wanted forgiveness, that everyone deserves a second chance. She said she was ready to be the mother she hadn't been before. I let her speak until her words ran dry. Then I picked up the folded note from the drawer, the one she had left 18 years ago, and placed it gently on the table between us. She stared at it like it was a weapon. She didn't touch it. Her face changed then. Desperation sharpened into anger. She accused me of poisoning the children against her. She said silence was worse than cruelty, that my calmness was more violent than shouting. But her words had no weight. Because silence is not violence, it is power. And power belongs to the one who does not flinch. By Sunday, her desperation turned to paranoia. She began asking questions about bank accounts, about the house, about the documents stacked neatly in my locked box. She wanted to know where she stood, what she could claim. I gave her nothing. She searched, but every corner was already secured. She wanted control, but she found only barriers. She had walked into a fortress built quietly, brick by brick, year after year. And the more she pushed, the more she realized that silence wasn't weakness. It was the system I'd built to survive her absence. And now, it was the same system that would dismantle her return. By Monday morning, Laura's desperation had curdled into something sharper. She no longer tiptoed. She pushed. When Emily came home from another long shift, Laura blocked her path in the hallway, insisting she listen. She spoke quickly, her voice trembling between anger and pleading. She said she deserved respect, that she was still their mother, that they couldn't erase her no matter how hard they tried. Emily looked at her once, then stepped past her without a word. That silence was louder than any argument. Later that day, Laura tried again with Daniel. She followed him to the driveway as he prepared for work, telling him she had made mistakes but was ready to make amends. Daniel didn't stop walking. He got in his car, closed the door, and drove away. The gravel crunching under his tires was the only answer she got. By evening, her frustration boiled over. She confronted me directly in the kitchen, her eyes wild. She said I had turned the children into stone, that my silence had poisoned them. She accused me of being manipulative, controlling, heartless. I let her spill every word. When she finished, I pointed to the guest room. She froze, then stormed upstairs, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. That night, I reviewed the footage from the security cameras. It had become a habit. On the screen, I watched her in the guest room, pacing, muttering, pulling open drawers. She rifled through old boxes, looking for something she could use. She found nothing. Every important document was locked away, every account secured years ago. I knew then what was coming. People like her don't retreat quietly. When desperation meets walls, they look for cracks. The next morning, she made her first real move. She picked up the phone in the living room and called someone, speaking in a low voice she thought I couldn't hear. She said she was home, that she was with her children again, that she needed advice on how to reclaim her place. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, memorizing every word. She thought she was building a plan. She didn't realize she was already inside mine. That evening, Emily pulled me aside. She said Laura had tried to corner her again, asking for her schedule, asking where she worked, asking questions that didn't belong to her. Emily's eyes were steady, but I could see the shadow of unease. That was the moment I knew it was time to escalate. Laura believed silence was weakness. She thought persistence could break it. But silence isn't the absence of strategy, it's the mask of it. And when the time comes to act, silence makes the strike sharper. Her return was no longer about apologies or explanations. It had shifted into something else. She wasn't just trying to come back. She was trying to take something she had already lost forever. And I was ready. By midweek, Laura's tone shifted from anger to panic. The silence had worn her down, ground away her confidence until all that remained was desperation. She tried to reclaim authority, but every attempt collapsed against the wall we had built in her absence. She wanted to be mom again, but the word had no power in a house she had abandoned for nearly 2 decades. One evening, I found her in the living room surrounded by photo albums. She had pulled them from the shelf and spread them across the floor. Pictures of birthdays, school plays, graduations, all moments she had missed. She stared at them like they were evidence in a trial, proof of her absence written in the smiles of children who had learned to live without her. When she noticed me in the doorway, she said, "You erased me." Her voice cracked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The photos answered for me. That night, Daniel returned late from work. She tried to greet him, tried to talk, but he brushed past her. She raised her voice, insisting she was still his mother. He stopped only once, turned toward her with a look so cold it silenced her mid-sentence. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Silence is hereditary. Her panic grew the next morning when Emily told her directly, "You can't undo 18 years." It was the only sentence spoken in that kitchen, but it was enough to leave Laura trembling. She spent the rest of the day pacing the house, trying to find cracks, some entry point where she could wedge herself back in. That evening, she confronted me again. This time her voice wasn't angry. It was pleading. She said she had nowhere else to go, that she had burned every bridge, that she had lost everything. She begged me to let her stay, to let her try. I sat in silence, steady and unflinching, because silence is more final than any refusal. Later that night, I reviewed the camera footage again. She hadn't noticed the system, not yet. But I saw her slipping into the study, opening drawers, rifling through files. She searched for proof, for leverage, for something she could claim. She found nothing. Every important document, every deed, every bank record, every legal paper was locked away. I had prepared for this long before she ever stepped back through the door. By Friday, the cracks in her composure were visible. She stopped smiling. Her hands shook when she spoke. She avoided the children, avoided their silence, and hovered around me instead, hoping for any reaction. But I gave her nothing, because silence was the answer she feared most. She thought she had returned to reclaim what she lost. What she didn't realize was that her presence was already the evidence of her failure. And when the time came, I would use that evidence. Quietly. By the weekend, Laura's desperation had tipped into fear. She no longer carried herself with the false confidence of a woman reclaiming her place. She looked like someone waiting for a verdict she already knew was coming. Every time Daniel entered the room without acknowledging her, every time Emily brushed past her in silence, the panic deepened in her eyes. She was no longer fighting for respect. She was fighting against erasure. On Saturday morning, I decided it was time to show her what silence had been preparing. I brought the locked box from my study and set it on the kitchen table. She watched me with narrowed eyes, like an animal sensing a trap. I opened it slowly, laying out the documents one by one. Birth certificates, school records, tax forms, bank statements, every page signed by me alone. Her absence written into every line. Finally, I placed the note she had left 18 years ago at the center. She didn't touch it. She didn't speak. Her breathing grew shallow as she scanned the papers, realizing they weren't just records. They were evidence. Proof that she had walked away. Proof that she had forfeited every claim long ago. She whispered, "What are you doing?" I stayed silent. Because silence in that moment was louder than accusation. That evening, she tried to rally one last time. She approached Emily, telling her she still had rights as their mother. Emily's answer was cold and final. She said, "Rights end when responsibility does." No shouting, no emotion, just the truth, delivered quietly. Laura's face crumbled. By nightfall, she stopped pacing the house. She stopped talking about second chances. She sat in the guest room with the door half shut, glancing at me whenever I passed by. She had expected to control the narrative with apologies, with excuses, with empty claims of motherhood. Instead, the narrative was now written in ink, in signatures, in years of absence documented carefully by my hands. The silence in the house was unbearable for her now. For me, it was power. For my children, it was justice. For her, it was the sound of a door closing forever. On Sunday morning, Daniel came to me quietly. He asked what the plan was. I told him it was already in motion. He nodded, understanding without needing details. He had inherited my way of seeing things. Watch, prepare, strike only when the moment is right. That afternoon, Laura approached me again, her voice barely more than a whisper. She asked if I was going to destroy her. I looked at her, calm and steady, and let the silence hang. Because silence, in that moment, was not a lack of answer. It was the answer. She had come back, believing she could step into the role she abandoned. But now she understood. The role had been erased, the stage dismantled, the audience gone. And all that remained was the weight of her own choices, sealed in documents she couldn't undo. The trap was already closed. She just hadn't realized yet how final it was. Sunday night carried a strange stillness. The house was quiet, but not the calm kind of quiet. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. Laura stayed in the guest room, door closed, suitcase still by the wall. She hadn't unpacked fully. Maybe she never believed she would need to. Maybe, deep down, she knew this wasn't a return, it was a last stop. At breakfast the next morning, Daniel and Emily sat at the table with me, their silence steady, unbroken. Laura joined us, trying to sit where she used to sit, as if muscle memory might rewrite history. She began to speak, her voice fragile. She said she wanted to make arrangements, to figure out how to move forward as a family. The words rang hollow in the room. No one answered. Even the refrigerator hum seemed louder than her plea. Finally, Daniel set his fork down. He looked her directly in the eyes and said what I knew was coming. "You had 18 years to be a mother. That time is gone." His tone was calm, deliberate. Not anger, not cruelty, just truth. That truth stripped away the last layer of her pretense. Her hands trembled as she reached for him, but he didn't move. The silence after his words was final. Laura stood slowly, her face pale. She turned to Emily, searching for something, mercy, softness, anything she could use. Emily only shook her head once, firmly, and returned to her meal. That was the last blow. Laura looked at me then, eyes wide with panic, as if I would rescue her. I didn't. I simply slid the folded note, the same one she had left 18 years ago, back across the table toward her. She stared at it, her breath uneven. She didn't pick it up. She didn't have to. The message was clear. What she had written then still stood now. By noon, she was gone. The suitcase rolled down the driveway, her figure small against the horizon. No goodbyes. No promises. Just departure, the same as before. Only this time she carried the weight of knowing she could never come back. That night, I walked through the house alone. The silence was different now. Not heavy, not suffocating. It was steady, clean, earned. My children had built their lives without her, and they had stood their ground when she tried to rewrite history. I sat at the kitchen table, the old box still open in front of me. Documents, photos, and that single folded note. Evidence, not just of her absence, but of our survival. I placed the note back in the drawer where it belonged. A relic, not a weapon. Some people fight back with noise. Some beg, some rage. But silence can be sharper than all of it. Silence can be final. 18 years ago, she thought she could walk away. 18 years later, she thought she could walk back in. Both times, she was wrong. And this time, she learned the truth the hard way. We weren't hers anymore. We never would be again. Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe. This is where we talk about what doesn't get forgiven.